Good evening, and thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 74. We are going to take a look at the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. But first of all, I want to give a big shout out to my listeners because you guys are awesome, and it's been a while since I've been on here. So first of all, my apologies about that, but it is good to be back and to be with you guys. So a big shout out to Oregon, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Oklahoma, Texas, Virginia, and British Columbia. So let's go ahead and take a look at this policy act here, the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA. This is a law, and it was enacted by United States Congress. So there's some things that Congress does, there are things that other departments do as well, but in terms of laws like this was enacted by the Congress. So that's very interesting to see this, that it was enacted by the Congress, because I think sometimes they kind of get jaded about our government and think that, the government doesn't care, when it does. We just want to make sure that it doesn't pass too many rules, laws, and regulations. But NEPA is known as the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. It was effective January 1st, 1970. And this is a United States environmental law that promotes the enhancement of the environment and established the President's Council on Environmental Quality, also known as CEQ. It says here, to date, more than 100 nations around the world have enacted national environmental policies modeled after NEPA. I find that very interesting with that because the United States is not as liberal as other countries. And I kind of feel like sometimes Europe and other countries, they use the United States as an excuse to pass rules, laws, and regulations that are so extreme and then say, look, the United States is doing it. And, that's not necessarily true. Do we pass rules, laws, and regulations in our country? Yes, for sure, we do. High five on that. Yes, we do. But we are not like France or the UK or Spain or some of these other countries that are very extreme in terms of the laws that they pass on the environment. And, Spain is not as extreme as France. But, a lot of those countries over there, they are very much socialist. And they don't really give people a lot of freedom to do much. And so, typically what happens in these socialist countries is they say, we care about the environment, and if you don't agree with our laws that we want to pass, then you must be okay with polluting the environment, and that's not true at all. But sometimes that's how things get so far extreme, and it just takes it on a whole different course that it's not even relevant to what was initially passed. I've often wondered what the UK, Scotland, Ireland, France, and some of the other socialist countries over there, including Italy, I sometimes wonder what they would be like today if they were truly capitalist. How many jobs would their people have? How much access to money would their people have? Because whenever you have socialism, you have less access to less money. So the big lie with socialism is that, it's free healthcare for all, everybody's going to be equal. Well, you may be equal, but you're going to be equally poor. So this comes down to laws like this. Whenever you have environmental laws, they start out with a really good cause, and this one started out really good, this policy act, and it grew out of concern in the 1950s and 60s, there was a Santa Barbara oil spill that occurred in 1969, and I guess it's one of the third worst oil spills that the United States has ever had. I never knew about this until I was researching about this policy act. But, oil spills, they happen. So I think that it's easy to say, look how bad this is. Look at the catastrophe. Well, guess what? I live in Oklahoma, as you know, my lovely listeners. And you know what? Almost every tornado we have is a catastrophe. It's horrible. That's just the nature of those types of events. So whenever you have an oil spill, I think it's extreme to say, it's the worst one, or it's the fourth worst one, or it's the second worst one, whatever the case may be. And it's like, oil spills happen. They're almost always an accident. No one intends for them to be intentional. But, there are a lot of things that happen in our world that are accidents that take place. I just don't think it should be, I'm probably not using the right word, but I don't think it should be basically, I can't even say it, catastrophe driven. I'm trying to think of another word. My apologies. I'm kind of tired at the moment. I'm filming this kind of late in the day, but it just seems to me like, it's easy to say, oh, this is the worst one, or, this is, similar to a really bad one we had decades ago or something like that. Well, you know what? All oil spills are bad. All of them. Every single one of them are bad. Can one be worse than the other? Sure. But I think that to make it so hyper-driven in terms of catastrophe, I think that's a mistake to do that. And the reason why is because oil spills can happen regardless of whether you're doing everything right or not. They're just things that can happen. But I think to make it extreme makes it reflect way too negatively on oil and gas companies. And I mention that because oil and gas companies, they do a lot of work that nobody else does. And I know some guys that I grew up with that, as far as I know, they are still working on oil rigs. Like ones out on the ocean it's very dangerous. I mean, they make a lot of money. Believe me, they make bank. But also, they put their life on the line. Like, that is very tough work. It's very hard. It's very laborious. It's not an office job, not by any means. I mean, it is very tough work. So there's a lot that goes into these industries. And to me, it just gets really old. Whenever people start complaining about oil spills, like, almost like they're trying to shame and blame oil companies all the time. Could there possibly be negligence? Sure. But the rate of that is extremely low because, I just don't see how a company, and maybe I'm being not ignorant, but, what's the right word? Naive is probably what I'm thinking of. I don't believe the majority of companies are just willingly being negligent in regards to environmental spills or environmental hazards of any kind, because to be negligent like that would, first of all, be immoral, illegal, and it also puts their company at risk for going under. So it's actually better for a company to follow all the rules, laws, and regulations because, first of all, it's the right thing to do. Secondly, they don't want to go out of business. So there are incentives for doing what is right. And there may be some people listening thinking, well, gee, Lesley, is the only reason an oil company wants to do things right is to make money. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when you do things right, even if you do everything right, something bad can still happen. So you have to take these things into account. And I'll give an example that's kind of a side note to this. When I was in college, I was best friends with a girl whose boyfriend was studying the oil and gas industry. Like, he was going to be kind of more hands-on engineer. I can't think of the right word, but he was going to be the type of oil and gas engineer where he actually works on site alongside with some of the workers there, because he would be in charge of the site. He would be doing soil samples. He would be doing all this stuff. And on the surface, you would think, oh, engineer, easy peasy job, cushy job, professional paper pusher. No, not by any means. It is a very tough field, and predominantly only men do this kind of work because it is really tough. That's not against women. I'm all for women having any job that they want that they can do. That's wonderful. But these kinds of jobs that this guy was studying for, he might be taken to, if he works for a particular company that's international, he could easily go work in Brazil or somewhere for several years at a time and then come back to the United States. So it's one of those things that, there are a lot of women that do want to be engineers, but they don't want to move like that for a job or for a company because, most women, they want to get married and they want to settle down and they want to have kids. That's wonderful. That's a beautiful thing. But this type of job was not like that. It was very strenuous. It was very backbreaking, I would say. And so there was one summer, he had to do an internship. I remember this. He did an internship on site. I can't remember what country or off what coast he went to, but it was really hard work. But he loved it. He learned so much. He got to know the people. He got to know the industry. He got to know the company. And, that's a really good internship to do because you learn a lot about your field, big time. So what's good about that type of work is that it shows you what to do and what not to do. You're trained and you're more equipped for when you actually go out into the field, because a lot of these jobs that deal with the oil and gas industry, they are not your average job. They're actually very difficult, very laborious, very intense. So I mention all that because, I remember when is it British Petroleum, BP or somebody, they had a big spill, and I remember this guy, I think it was the CEO, the president of the company. He has a British accent. I can't remember his name. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. He actually had to do an interview, and then they did a commercial, basically letting the world know that they care and that they're cleaning it up. And I just thought, how sad is that he has to make a commercial, just to make sure that people know that his company, that his company cares to do the right thing. And I just think, that's so sad that he's basically being, fed to the wolves because of political hearsay, because of favoritism within socialist countries, and they look down on the private sector in any country. And they also look down on capitalism. And what's interesting is that these socialist countries, they claim to care, but they really don't. Because these socialist countries, they say they care about people, but if they really did, they would have low taxes, and they would not be punishing industries like this. So I think, I just remember at the time thinking, this poor guy, I felt so sorry for him because he's basically being thrown in front of the bus or under the bus, whatever wording you want to use, just for the sake of trying to save the company, even though their spill was not intentional, not by any means. These things can happen. And plus, here's the thing. What people don't realize is that when there are spills like this, we have so much technology within that field, within that industry, like oil and gas, that they know within seconds when something has broken or gone wrong, and they start the cleanup immediately. And I remember watching the news on this, and it really bugged me. It really irritated me, actually. It really bothered me that the news had like a live camera feed they were feeding off of, showing all this oil bubbling up, I guess out of the earth into the water, into the ocean, and saying, look how many gallons of oil are spilling into the ocean and all this stuff. And I'm like, they're making it seem like, British Petroleum or whatever their name is, they're making it seem like they're not doing enough. And I'm like, do you realize, they are doing everything they can to stop that leak, to stop that spill. And so all the news did was it heightened it, and it just made it horrible. And I just thought, the news is really good at making things seem worse than it really is, but also taking away the benefit of the doubt. Does that situation suck of what happened? Yes, it totally sucked. I mean, I won't deny that at all. It was horrible, and I have no doubt it took a while to clean that up. But I think what's even worse is shaming and blaming and demonizing. And that's what happened during that oil spill. And so I just turned off the TV. I got sick of watching it. Because I thought, it's not right to report a story and make it seem like nothing's being done or not enough is being done quickly enough when the company is obviously aware of what is happening. And, here's the thing. What people don't realize is that when there's an oil spill, it's not just the environment that could be damaged. It's people's lives. People could have gotten hurt. And I don't know if people did get hurt. I could look that up and see. But, what I don't understand with environmentalism and kind of this social agenda, this socialized agenda when dealing with the environment and environmental issues, it's like people don't matter anymore. It's just shaming and blaming of people, and we just idolize and lift up the environment over, above, and beyond the value of human dignity and the value of human life. That was never what environmentalism was founded on. Not at all. It was not founded on punishing people or devaluing people. It technically was started by the Republican Party and initialized by President Richard Nixon because of an outcry in the United States of all these different federal agencies that were not really doing a good job of cleaning up the environment or informing the public of what was going on. And so the general public was very concerned for their health and well-being. Because here's the thing, because if we don't have our health and our well-being, then the environment doesn't either. Because if you protect the people, if you make it so that people can live somewhere, then your environment is going to be right there with those people, and it will be livable and sustainable. But if all you're ever doing is just focusing on grass, weeds, plants, possums, animals, whatever the case may be, if all you're focusing on are these other things, the environment, just straight environment, but you're not really caring about people, then you have completely missed the mark of what it means to be a human being and to care about other people. Because, to care about the environment means that, how do I word this? I was going to say that I love you, I care about you, and you're my neighbor, and I'm going to do everything I can that is reasonable, good, moral, and true to help you. That's what it means to be a good neighbor. But let's say, for example, I'm just gonna throw out an extreme here. Let's say I can't stand people, but I love the environment. Well, guess what? I'm not going to think that people are good enough for the environment, because in this analogy, I dislike people and I'm putting the environment above human life. Even though the environment was made for human life. Our planet was made for us to exist. I think people have forgotten that, when God made the world, technically He made the entire solar system and our, just everything that goes on with this. But when He made all this, He made it for us. He made it for you and for me. So the environment is a gift to us. We are not a gift to the environment. Does that make sense? What I don't understand with the EPA and the environmental agenda is that over and over again it devalues people and it shames and blames people. Just all across the board. It's really weird. And this shaming and blaming comes from different federal agencies that are under the umbrella of the EPA, even though they were not. I truly do believe, and maybe I'm naive in this, but I truly do believe that the EPA and these different federal agencies were created and founded, to protect people. Because it's people that matter. Because if you don't protect your people, then you're not going to have a planet. But if you do what's best for yourself and for others, then you're going to be taking care of your backyard, your front yard, your house, the highways, the roadways, everything, the forest, the walking trails, the mountains, the hills, the valleys, the oceans, the lakes, the rivers, the streams, water supply, the water table, everything. When you put things in the right order, then everything else falls into place. But unfortunately, over the years, these different environmental acts, and this is one of them, NEPA, NEPA, it has been taken out of context, and it's been made, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's been turned into an agenda as opposed to, hey, this is how we need to really help things in our world. It's been turned into almost like a to-do list of how to bother people and how to make things extreme. And one of the things where it's gotten off track, and mind you, it started out really good. And this particular act, it puts into place a way for federal agencies to have a kind of like an action plan of what they want to do within their federal agency and how they want to handle things and how they want to help with the environment and things like that. And so they have all these ways of doing that, but it just kind of seems like it's becoming more and more of a professional paper pusher kind of agenda as opposed to actually helping. So, with the National Environmental Policy Act, it's supposed to promote the enhancement of the environment. Well, these days it's kind of getting off track because it's not really staying within those confines. It's bleeding over into other things that are not always appropriate, and it's not really doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is to enhance and promote environmental issues, but at the same time not dehumanize people. But unfortunately, it's kind of turned that way. And I don't understand completely why. I mean, I could take a guess and I can say, well, if I just kind of feel like the Democratic Party has taken over things that it should not have taken over, because technically what people don't realize is that the EPA belongs to both Republicans and Democrats. It belongs to both parties. But unfortunately, because we've got some crazy liberals that have taken over the Democratic Party, they have since hijacked a lot of these different federal agencies that are supposed to help people, not punish people. So to me, that's a big problem because we're getting way off target. Our target, yes, is the environment, and to repair it, to renew it, to make it better, and to have accountability. There should be accountability, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. However, if all you're doing is making it agenda-based and not doing good, then it's becoming a problem. It's becoming a bureaucratic nightmare, which is kind of what's been going on. So it goes on to talk about how it develops, I guess, it kind of reminds me of like impact statements. And so I guess from what I understand with this, it's like these agencies, they have to have a plan, and they have to say, hey, this is what our goal is, and then it has to be approved. Well, we've got a lot of federal agencies that are just overinflated with money. They're overspending, and it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And it has slowly become that way because it's like we have more and more bureaucracy, but less and less accountability. So to me, that's why a lot of this stuff has gotten off track, even though it has a great cause. It has a great beginning. It's just not staying where it needs to be. So, but I'm going to dive into a different part of this. It says that NEPA covers a vast array of federal agency actions, but the Act does not apply to state action where there is a complete absence of federal influence or funding. Exemptions and exclusions are also present within NEPA's guidelines, including specific federal projects detailed in legislation and EPA exemptions. I just wonder about the exemptions on this, because to me it just kind of seems like it depends on who's in charge, who thinks what should be exempt, and I think that's one of the problems because there's not consistency. And when you're dealing with anything to do with the federal government or state government, because you're dealing with tax dollars, whether they are at the federal level or state level, there should be consistency. There shouldn't be this inconsistent protocols or actions based on who's in charge or who gets elected, because these are federal agencies. They're not coming and going. How to word this? They're not coming and going depending on who's in office. These federal agencies are there regardless of who's in office. But what's happening is you're getting these people that are put in charge of these federal agencies, and it's like, again, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing based on which political party is in charge at the time. And these federal agencies should not be run based on a political party. They should be run based on their accountability to the taxpayer, which is you and me. It's everybody. It's everybody in this country, in the United States, that pays taxes, that these federal agencies, should be held accountable to. But unfortunately, when these agencies get off track, that's when they have problems where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because they are being run based on the political avenue that is being taken for that span of 4 years for the term of office of a presidency, because it's typically the president of the United States that kind of determines what people we have in charge of what, because the president, he picks his cabinet, but he also picks people that picks people that picks people. So that's why you have to be careful who you vote for and really know who you're voting for and what you think they're going to do. Because, we can't predict everything. but you need to have a really good idea. Hey, what is this person, what do I think they're going to do when they hold office? What have they done in the past? What are they saying that they're doing right now? And what are they planning on doing in the future? And also, who are they associated with? Like, who are their allies? And I don't mean allies in a bad way. I mean allies in a good way, because regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you need allies. You know, a faithful friend is a sturdy shelter. I mean, that comes straight out of the Bible. So there's nothing wrong with having an ally or a confidant or a friend or a best friend or whatever the case may be. But whenever you're voting for someone, you need to be aware of who they are directly associated with, because whoever they are associated with will tell you kind of how they're going to swing on certain decisions. And it's really the decision-making skills that are really important to things like this. Because a person can say one thing, but their decision could be something different. And I'll give an example of this. It's like if you have a job and you have a boss that's flaky. They say one thing in an email, or maybe they drop a note on your desk or something. Like they say one thing here, but then something completely different comes out of their mouth. And it's like, well, what were you really wanting me to do? Or, what kind of meeting did you think we're going to have? Things like that. Like there needs to be consistency with what comes out of someone's mouth in regards to also what they do in their actions is the thing. So this goes on to say exemptions also apply when compliance with other environmental laws require an impact analysis similar to that mandated by NEPA. So that impact analysis, that is based on this policy act where you have these agencies where they have to say, okay, what are we going to do and what are we expecting? What is our analysis? Because prior to the EPA being created by President Richard Nixon, you had these federal agencies that were kind of scattered and scatterbrained in terms of how they functioned and how they mandated themselves. And I don't mean scatterbrained disrespectfully, but it's one of those things that they were not really regulating themselves to the best of their ability, because you have to think about this. All of this was new back then. Like we can look back and say, oh, they shouldn't have done that. They should have did this, da 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 da. We can look back and say, oh, here are the pros and cons, and this is what I would have done, da 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 da. Well, here's the thing. All of this stuff was new at one point in time. So the people that were in charge at the time were making the best decisions that they knew how, because this was completely new. Like prior to President Nixon founding and creating the EPA, we didn't have an EPA. All we had were these different federal agencies that were not talking to each other, because these federal agencies, they kind of remind me of our different branches of the military. Like the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, it's like, and the Air Force, forget about them, my apologies, Air Force. But it's like, we have a really large military, and we have the best military on the planet, the United States does, and it's wonderful. But sometimes our military, it's like, I've noticed that soldiers from different branches of the military, it's like they don't always have camaraderie for each other. It's like they only have camaraderie within their own little division or branch within that. And that's not the American way. Yes, you're trained differently. Yes, the Air Force pilot is trained differently than boots on the ground, a Army, Marine Corps person or something. Yes, they're different, but we're both on the same side. And sometimes I can just tell when they're not really communicating with each other very well. There's just this combativeness. There's this lack of communication. And if anybody needs to really communicate with each other, it's our military people. And I've noticed this over the years. And maybe they've just got it tough, I don't know. But that reminds me of these federal agencies. It's like, well, we're on Team A, you're on Team B, we don't care about Team C. No. We technically are all on the same team. We just have different jobs, different responsibilities. So we have different protocols that we do based on our job function. That doesn't mean that one is better or worse than the other. It just means we have different responsibilities, but we do need to communicate with each other. Well, unfortunately, back before the EPA was created, we had these federal agencies that were around, and they were just kind of, I want to say I hate to use this, but it's like they're having a pissing contest. It was just so competitive with each other. And so the great thing, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the great thing about the EPA is it really tried to control that and say, hey, yes, we have different federal agencies. Yes, you have different jobs, but now we are all under one branch when dealing with the environment and things like that. So that's the good thing about the EPA is that it stopped a lot of nonsense within these federal agencies that had no, I mean, I don't know how to describe this, but it's kind of like, I would think that if I worked for a federal agency even way back then, just my personality and my nature, I would not have had that pettiness. I would not have done that. I'm just like, I would do the job, do it well. And, I would think that, just because someone is within a different federal agency, that doesn't mean that their job is less than mine or mine's better than theirs or vice versa, whatever the case may be. Because a job is a job. You show up, you do the job, you do it well. But unfortunately, these federal agencies did not act like that. They were having little power trips all the time. So another good thing about the EPA is it buffered a lot of egos and arrogance way back then, because it said, hey, we all are on the same team. So we have a responsibility to communicate with each other. Well, that's what part of this impact analysis is talking about, because it's one of the requirements as part of NEPA for these federal agencies to have a impact analysis or a plan of how they're going to handle things and what their initiative is and how they plan to handle it. Because before then, I'm not saying it was necessarily laissez-faire, but it wasn't up to snuff, as they say. So it goes on to say such laws can include but are not limited to the Clean Air Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So again, there are a lot of things that go into this policy act, and what's interesting about this is that with NEPA, how do I word this? Like, there's so much I want to say. It is almost like a stepping stone to passing other types of legislation, which is good. I get concerned whenever people want to use another policy act or mandate as a diving board to pass a whole bunch of other things. But when it comes to this, I actually agree with it, because they needed to start somewhere to handle all these issues that were taking place within the United States regarding our environment, because if we don't have an environment, then you and I cannot survive. So in this particular case, I actually am for them coming together and wanting to have, a type of environmental control or environmental quality. And I use that cautiously, because whenever you're talking about the federal government, the last thing you want to talk about is control, because the federal government tends to, take it too far. You give them an inch, they go a mile or 5,000 miles in regards to this. But this is one of those things where it's very important that if we're starting somewhere, that we know where we're going, especially when we're talking about laws in regards to the environment. Now, I don't know how much of this they actually implement. I just don't really know in terms of, really deciding and deciphering, okay, what are we going to have as an action plan or a type of impact analysis for a law, a mandate, our agency, a project, whatever the case may be, because whatever they come up with somewhat determines their funding. Because if someone, this is what it says supposedly, that if their impact analysis plan or the protocols that they want to do, if it's not seen as good or not really part of their agency, I guess you could say, then this affects their funding. But I find that kind of odd, because if anything, we've seen in times past, there are so many federal agencies that get a lot of funding and probably too much funding. So I would be very surprised if any of these were told no. So that would really, it would just surprise me, because as of yet, I haven't seen where they have not received funding or they have not been held accountable for monies or things of that nature. So it's kind of one of those things. So it says here, in determining whether to prepare an environmental impact statement, the analysis that they want to do, it says the federal agency shall, number one, determine under its procedures supplementing these regulations whether the proposal is one which normally requires an environmental impact statement or normally does not require either an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment. So when they're talking about an environmental assessment, they're talking about a type of exclusion. So it says a categorical exclusion. So this is just kind of legal jargon, like what I just read. So basically, I guess the NEPA is a way to make sure that they're staying on track with their environmental requirements, their environmental impact statements. Because it's just, I can't even talk. It says that if they don't agree with their environmental statement, then this can affect their funding. But again, I don't see that. Because all I see is a whole lot of spending going nowhere. And I'm not really seeing a lot of, I don't know how to describe it, I'm not seeing a lot come to fruition in terms of good in regards to all this federal spending. So that kind of concerns me a little bit. So it says here consequences for violating the National Environmental Policy Act. So it says agencies that violate NEPA may suffer harms to their reputations that can jeopardize future funding opportunities. I haven't seen that yet. I have not seen that. I would be very surprised. Okay, so it says because the CEQ does not have enforcement authority for their guidelines, alleged violations must generally go through the judicial system. These lawsuits can further harm the agencies by demanding money and resources from the federal government and delay projects for years. So here's the thing. If you have all these lawsuits, it's really not the agency that suffers or the federal government. It's you and me because it's our tax dollars. So whenever you have these kind of frivolous federal lawsuits taking place like this, I just kind of have to roll my eyes because I'm like, all it is really is just someone... Basically, they're just palming a 20 and putting it into someone else's hand. It's not really going where you think it's going to go, and it's not really doing any good. It's just, okay, if you've got a problem, handle it, deal with it. If something's not up to snuff, then you know what, redo it, make it better. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with the federal government, sometimes its mode of handling things is just to, how do I word this? Well, I was going to say waste money. I was trying to be nice. Waste money, waste time, make it seem like they're doing stuff, which again is just professional paper pushing. And that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help me. It does not help our country. So, again, I think NEPA, as convoluted as it is with this, because you'd think this would be a simple thing to discuss, but it's not, because it is a, how do I word this? It's not as simple as what you would think. Like when I'm researching this, it's like, well, it's almost like the IRS code. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like you would think it would be simple, but it's not. So it's just full of a lot of fluff and saying, oh, we have analysis, we have impact statements. If we don't like your impact statement, then you're not going to get funding. And it's like, I have to call the BS card because they get funding all the time, these different agencies. So I think it's kind of like, again, like palming a 20 from one agency and going to another, especially if they have to take it to court. So, here's another thing. We need to be careful about court cases that go to court when you're dealing with federal agencies like this because, yes, we want accountability, but do you really want something to be held up in court for years? And all you're doing when you're dealing with a federal agency being sued by the federal government or things like that, we're really just suing ourselves because we're the taxpayer. We're the one who's paying for all of it. So, so whenever you have an agency or someone within the federal government that just loses a case, it's really the taxpayer that loses. So what I wish would happen instead of suing or, doing things through the judicial branch when it comes to things like this, I just wish that they would, make a note of it, of what happened, and just fire the person that's causing the problem. Just replace them. Like, don't even go through a lawsuit. Just fire the person. Get someone in there that knows what they're doing and just fix the problem. Because otherwise, if all we're doing is just suing, agency to agency, federal government, agency and things like that, all we're doing is shooting ourselves in the foot, and we're just wasting our tax dollars. And here's the thing, lawyers are going to make money one way or another. So if all we're going to do is just petty lawsuits like this that amount to nothing, all we're doing is enabling law firms across the United States to make millions, if not billions of dollars off of the American taxpayer. But yet it's not really accomplishing anything. That's why I think if there's a problem, within a federal agency, you just fire the employee that's causing the problem. I mean, I get that a lot of these agencies, they are unionized, but here's the thing. Sometimes people need to be fired. That's just how it is, especially when you are serving in a type of public office, or if you are working for the federal government. If you're working in any kind of government position, whether it is a elected position or if you're just a hired on employee, say for example, you are an accountant for the federal government. Well, guess what? If you do something really wrong, you should be fired. That's just how it is, because that's how it is in the private sector. But unfortunately, with the federal government and with these federal jobs, a lot of them are unionized. So it makes it very difficult. And I guess this kind of goes into, the initial theme of this podcast was to go over different labor unions and work unions within the United States, or labor organizations. Because, these unions, they kind of get in the way of the federal government and the private sector being able to hire the right people and fire the wrong people. Because here's the thing, the longer you keep the wrong employee, the harder it is to get your company back on track. And it's the same thing within the federal government. And I think that's one reason why we have so many problems within our federal agencies that we have, is because it's like pulling teeth to get rid of the bad apple. And, that's not to say anything bad about the bad apples, but it's just like, sometimes people need to move on to better things. And, here's the thing. If someone is truly the problem, then you're actually doing them a favor by firing them, because they need to go do a job that is actually fulfilling to them and is their calling. But if something is not their calling and they're not good at it and it's causing a huge problem, especially in the public sector, then it's technically our responsibility as the taxpayers to fire those people. Because when you're working in any type of public sector job, I expect the cream of the crop. Of course, we may not be getting the cream of the crop because a lot of the cream of the crop is located in the private sector. But all the more reason to be careful and cautious about who we hire and who we fire. So that's why, in regards to the NEPA, I am very much in favor of not suing, not having judicial lawsuits. I would rather them just fire the people that are the problem and get the right people in there. Because otherwise, we're just suing ourselves. We're just suing ourselves over tax dollars. And, it's always the American people that's on the hook for money like this. See, because here's another thing that people forget, is that the federal government has endless amounts of money to spend because it's our tax dollars. I mean, they have our currency. So if they want to sue someone, whether it's a federal agency or if it's someone in the private sector or if it's a private citizen, whatever the case may be, the federal government, they have no end to how long they can make a lawsuit last, which sucks. I don't like that. I think there should be limitations. I think it's wrong for the federal government to drag out lawsuits because, first of all, it's a waste of judicial time and it is a waste of our tax dollars. And it's just not ethical. I don't understand why this stuff is tolerated. I don't understand why more judges don't throw stuff like that out, because the more these cases clog up the works and they clog up our courthouses, the more, how do I word this? the more the important cases don't get handled quickly or they get dismissed because there's not enough time or money or effort or energy to handle the really important ones. So I think we need to be careful what we allow to sue and not be sued, because there's so many people, we all have a voice in this country. If you're a citizen, if you're not a citizen, you don't have a voice. Sorry, that's just how it is. But if you're a visitor, just be a tourist. But you don't have a voice in our government or much of anything. So just enjoy your stay and then leave. But here's the thing. Every citizen in the United States has a voice. But whenever a lawsuit, especially by the federal government, is dragged out, that voice gets squashed and eventually silenced because the federal government has access to so much money because of our tax dollars. That's just how it is. I think the federal government should be limited on who it sues and how it sues. And a big example of this is what's it called? The EPA. I was going to say NEPA, but it's EPA. Because, they have this National Environmental Policy Act, and it sounds good on the surface. Hey, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing in terms of environmentalism, all those good things. We want to make sure that, we're on the same page, but yet we have the EPA that's just running amok, going after people, suing people, trying to confiscate their private property. And it's like, well, is that part of their environmental assessments? Is that part of their environmental impact statements? We're going to try and confiscate private citizens' property and bankrupt them? I guarantee you it's not part of their assessments or their impact statements, but yet that's exactly what the EPA is doing. So I find it very interesting that we have this National Environmental Policy Act, but it's not being utilized the way that it's supposed to be utilized. It's supposed to be about people. Because you and I, we are the environment, and we do impact the environment. But we should not be shamed and blamed. Not by any means. Like, the EPA was not created to shame, blame, hurt, or harm people, or to destroy their livelihood or their businesses. Quite the contrary. The EPA was founded and created to protect people, because people were getting exposed to hazardous toxic waste. So it's one of those things that I think we really need to focus on, putting people first. Technically God first, then people, because if we don't have God, I put it this way, if we don't believe in God, we've got a big problem in this country. Because, even our money says, in God we trust. And I trust God every day of my life, especially during the tough times, because that's when it's the toughest. Truly it is. But we really need to put God first in this country. And then we need to put people first as well. Because if all we're doing is putting these agendas first, well, here's the thing. Whose agenda is more important? You know what I mean? Like, for example, if I have a cause, let's say, for example, I believe in protecting the whales, which I do. They're beautiful, wonderful creatures and we need them. But if all I'm focused on are the whales, but I don't care about people, then I've totally missed the mark of what it means to be a human being. Because, let's say, for example, all I care about is whales, but I hate people, then wouldn't it be kind of hypocritical for me to expect people to love me and respect me when I hate other people? Like, there needs to be, it's not equality, but just that basic human kindness. And unfortunately, when we focus too much on the environment and we all focus on our little agendas, whether it's the whales, the seashores, the coral reef, lobsters, volcanoes, the forest, whatever the case may be, if all we're doing is focusing on our own personal little agenda, and those things can be important, yes, but if all we're focusing on are these little agendas, and we really hyperventilate over them, then we're not really doing what we are supposed to be doing in terms of being a human being and caring about other people and caring about their health, their safety. Because if I don't care about your health or your safety, Why would I care if you live in a hovel and are exposed to gas fumes? See, that's the lie of environmentalism. When you put the environment above people, you're actually not caring at all about anything. And that may hurt some people's feelings that hear this podcast, but hear me out. You'll practice some due diligence here and practice some patience with me here. If all you care about is something that doesn't have a soul, you've got a big problem. And your problem is that you're living a soulless life. None of us, not a single person on the face of this earth, is called to live a soulless life. It's quite the opposite. Every single one of us is supposed to live our life because we have a soul. Because we were made in the image of Almighty God. And He loves us, provides for us, cherishes us. Because every single one of us are one of His children. Being that we are one of God's children, that makes us related in a way. We are brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus. So, being that we are in the same family, we are in God's family, then it's not logical, rational, or reasonable, or loving to not love you. Does that make sense? So, if all I care about is the environment, but I don't care about you, then technically, that would make me a fake and a fraud and a phony. Because I'm not valuing what I'm supposed to care about, which is my neighbor, my fellow man, woman, or child. Because when I care about my neighbor, my fellow man, woman, or child, then I'm going to value what environment we live in as people, meaning you and me, as part of community, as part of this town, this city, this state, this nation, this beautiful nation that we call home, that we call the United States. But, it's like, for example, Oklahoma is very competitive with Texas, especially in football. Even though I don't like very many Texas fans, I love them. I do. I love Texas. I love them very much. And I will say this, Texans are very loyal people. I'm very impressed with Texans. The state of Texas has a very well-written constitution, that's for sure, because they know they can leave the United States at any time. I mean, that is an amazing legal document. But here's what's even more amazing. It's the people that live there. Because the people that live in Texas, they are some of the hardest working people that I've met outside of Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahomans, we are pretty tough and we are very hardworking. I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever visited Oklahoma. If you have not, do come visit. I would love to meet you. But here's the thing. Oklahomans, you have to be tough to live here. As I've said in previous podcasts, in Oklahoma, we have extreme weather. We have tornadoes, we have blizzards, we have ice storms, we have flash floods, we have, black ice, hail, sleet, snow, and this can all happen in a month. Like, it can happen very quickly. It's crazy. Oh, and we can have dust bowls as well. Like, we had a dust bowl, really bad one back here in the 1930s, but, whenever we have a really bad drought in Oklahoma, sometimes it looks like a dust bowl is going on right outside, and that happened when I was in college. We had not had rain in a long time, and I remember volunteering at like this career event with one of my friends. So we go to this career event to help graduating seniors to get jobs and things like that. And everybody that came in looked like they had soot, or they were all wearing brown suits and jackets. And we're like, what is going on? Well, a dust storm had hit our town. And everybody just came in, just loaded up with dirt on them, because the soil, we don't have the best soil here compared to like Mississippi and things like that. So our soil can be very dry, especially our topsoil. It's not the most fertile soil. So it just kind of picks up and, very easily gets blown around by the wind. So everybody that came in had to dust off. Well, literally, I had to go out to my vehicle to go get something. And oh my goodness, I had to put my jacket over my face to not inhale all this dirt that was in the air. And then when I got back inside, I had to go to the ladies' restroom and dust off, get all this dirt off of me. I mean, it was in my hair, it was in my ears. I tried to not get it in my eyes, and it was just crazy. But, to live in Oklahoma, you have to be really tough. So I kind of consider Texas to be our sister state, kind of like our big sis, because they're such a large state, and they're just really good, hardworking people. So, being that I know that Texas is a really good state, they're very loyal people, if all I ever focus on is the environment, but I don't care about people, then that's kind of a slap in the face to my neighbor, which would be Texas. Because it would be like, well, it's like, I care about, the beaches that you guys have, but I don't care about the people that are actually on the beach. That makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because who is the beach for, the coast for? It's for people. It'd be like if I go to Dallas and I go shopping, and let's say I love to go shopping there, but let's say I can't stand people, but yet I want to help out with any type of environmental issue that's taking place in Dallas, Texas, and let's say I show up with a sign and I'm really rooting for whatever environmental issue is going on. Well, if I don't really care about people, then that makes me a hypocrite. Because first of all, I'm not even from there. Number two, if I don't care about people, then why would I even stand up for the environment? Because the environment is for people. It is for us to sustain ourselves and for us to live and to have a good life. So, but anyway, that is it for this lovely podcast. And we talked a lot about a lot of good stuff here. The National Environmental Policy Act. I think it's a good one. I just think it's gotten off track, like many things within the federal government. But I do think it is possible to get back on track and to do some good. So until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole. That you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye bye.